Love, at its purest, is supposed to heal, to comfort, to make us better than we are. But sometimes love becomes something else entirely. It twists, it clings, it blinds, and in some of the darkest stories, that love becomes deadly. In the year 2011, Shayna Michelle Hubers was a 20-year-old graduate student pursuing her master's in school psychology. She was brilliant, confident, and ambitious, someone who prided herself on being both intellectually sharp and emotionally driven. Shayna wasn't just an ordinary girl next door. She was talented, articulate, and had always believed she was destined for something significant. But beneath that poised academic exterior, there was something more, something turbulent, something deeply intense. She had a need for control, for reassurance, for being seen and adored. And when she entered the world of online dating that summer, she wasn't just looking for casual company. She was looking for a connection so deep, so consuming, that it would consume both her and the person on the other end. That's when she met Ryan Poston. Ryan was everything Shayna believed she wanted. He was 29, a young, successful, and highly intelligent attorney based in Highland Heights, Kentucky. He came from a well-off family, was good-looking, ambitious, and had a reputation for being charming and deeply analytical. Ryan was practicing law at a firm he co-founded and was quickly gaining a name for himself, particularly in business and personal injury cases. Shayna, with her academic background and vibrant personality, was immediately drawn to his intellect and status. Ryan at first found her attractive and smart, someone interesting to spend time with. They began dating not long after their initial messages, but while the relationship may have seemed promising on the surface, the reality was far more complicated. From almost the very beginning, Shayna appeared far more invested in the relationship than Ryan. Her messages were constant, often intense. She would text him dozens of times a day, always needing to know where he was, who he was with, what he was doing. If he didn't reply quickly enough, the messages would become desperate, even aggressive. Friends of Ryan later recalled how uneasy he felt with the way she clung to him emotionally, how she always seemed to push her way back into his life, no matter how many times he tried to distance himself. Ryan, ever the gentleman, didn't want to be cruel. He tried to end the relationship multiple times, but Shayna would always return with tears, apologies, and emotional pleas. Sometimes she would say she couldn't live without him. Other times she would threaten to harm herself if he left her. Ryan, like many men in similar situations, felt trapped, not because he loved her the same way, but because he feared what she might do if he truly cut her off. And so the cycle continued, on again, off again, breakup, reconciliation, texts filled with affection one day, and threats or accusations the next. Over the course of 18 months, their relationship spiraled into something dark and obsessive. Shayna monitored Ryan's life like a hawk. She logged into his Facebook, intercepted his messages, even deleted female contacts from his phone. She would call him over and over, leave voicemails that ranged from tearful to furious, often within minutes of each other. She once sent over 100 text messages to him in a single day. Her love wasn't just intense, it was suffocating, possessive, controlling. Ryan's friends noticed a change in him. He seemed exhausted, emotionally worn down. He would speak to close confidants, expressing regret over ever getting involved with Shayna. He told multiple people he felt like she was a storm he couldn't escape, and that she had become like a shadow in his life, always present, always watching. But he didn't know how to end it safely. Every time he tried, she would beg, cry, show up uninvited. Sometimes she would even fake illnesses or exaggerate injuries just to draw him back in. In early October 2012, Ryan had finally reached his breaking point. He had met someone new, Audrey Bolt, a beauty queen and former Miss Ohio USA. She was kind, grounded, and offered Ryan the sort of calm he hadn't felt in years. They exchanged messages and agreed to go on their first date on October 12th. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for Ryan to move forward, but before he could fully take that step, Shayna found out. That evening, Shayna showed up uninvited to Ryan's apartment. Ryan, hesitant and likely wanting to avoid a scene, let her in. What happened inside his Highland Heights condo that night would never be fully known, except through the chilling aftermath. At exactly 8:25 p.m., Shayna called 911. Her voice on the line was surprisingly calm. Not the voice of someone hysterical or in panic, but one that was strangely composed. "I shot my boyfriend," she said. The dispatcher asked her to clarify. "Yes, I did. I killed him," she repeated. When asked why, Shayna claimed self-defense. She said Ryan had become violent, that he was throwing her around, that he was going to hurt her, and she acted to protect herself. But the details she offered were strange, disconnected. And when officers arrived at the scene, what they found told a very different story. Ryan Poston was dead on the floor, shot 6 times, 2 bullets to his face, 1 to his chest, and 3 more across his upper body. His body was twisted and slumped in a manner that suggested he had been caught off guard, sitting when the shots were fired. There were no signs of struggle, no bruises on Shayna, no evidence of a fight. Just a young man, smart, successful, and on the verge of a new life, now lifeless in his own home. Police took Shayna into custody that night and began questioning her. What unfolded in that interview room would leave even the most hardened detectives disturbed. Shayna was talkative, too talkative. She spoke for hours, repeating her version of events again and again, each time slightly altered. In one moment, she said Ryan had pushed her. In another, she said he picked her up and threw her against the furniture. Then she changed it again, saying he looked like he was reaching for a weapon. There were inconsistencies in nearly every version. Then, during a break in the interrogation, while left alone in the room, Shayna did something bizarre. She began to talk to herself, aloud, commenting on the situation with an eerie detachment. At one point, she laughed and said, "I did give him the nose job he always wanted." She smiled, twirled around, danced. Yes, she danced, in the very room where she had just confessed to killing the man she claimed to love. When detectives reviewed the footage, they were stunned. This wasn't the behavior of a woman traumatized by violence. It was something else, something chilling. The news of Ryan's death quickly spread through the community. Friends, family, and even the public were shocked. A young lawyer, full of potential, gunned down in his own apartment by a woman who had once called herself his soulmate. The media picked up the case immediately, and soon it wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a national story. But this was only the beginning. Because what no one realized yet was that the case of Shayna Hubers would soon reveal even more disturbing truths. Text messages, journal entries, manipulation, and a psychological descent into something few had ever seen. Was Shayna the victim of abuse as she claimed? Or was she a woman so obsessed, so unable to accept rejection, that she would rather see Ryan dead than with someone else? The answer to that question would become the heart of a courtroom battle. But first, investigators had to dig deeper, to piece together what had really happened in the days, weeks, and months leading up to that fatal night. Because sometimes the most dangerous place to be is in the arms of someone who says they love you, but won't let you leave alive. The moment Shayna Hubers was arrested, it became clear to detectives that this case wouldn't be simple. It wasn't just about a woman claiming self-defense, it was about 2 very different portraits of the same relationship. One told by Shayna, a heartbroken girlfriend, insisting she feared for her life, and the other slowly revealed through text messages, voicemails, and conversations with Ryan's friends, showing a man trying desperately to free himself from the grip of a woman who refused to let go. After Shayna was placed in custody, the Highland Heights police began working methodically, trying to reconstruct the events that led to Ryan Poston's death. First, they reviewed the crime scene. Ryan's body was found slumped beside a dining room table, surrounded by blood and shell casings. He had been shot 6 times with a .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol, 2 bullets directly to his face, 1 to his chest, and 3 additional shots. Forensic evidence suggested that the shots were not fired in quick succession but spaced out, methodical. Some even indicated that Ryan may have already been incapacitated when the final shots were fired. There were no signs of a physical altercation, no bruises or injuries on Shayna, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, nothing that supported her claim of a violent struggle. Then came the interrogation room footage. The entire world would later see the clips, but for investigators, watching Shayna's behavior within hours of killing someone she claimed to love was disturbing. She didn't appear remorseful or traumatized. Instead, she acted as though she were starring in a scene of her own making. Between statements like, "I did give him the nose job he always wanted," and twirling around the room, humming and smiling, she seemed disconnected from the gravity of what had occurred. At one point, she even asked officers if they thought she was pretty enough to be on television. Detectives knew then this case would come down to credibility, and Shayna was already unraveling hers, word by word. As they dug deeper, a more complex picture of her relationship with Ryan emerged. Shayna had sent Ryan over 50,000 text messages during their 18-month relationship. Many of them were loving, many were disturbing. There were long, emotional declarations about how she couldn't live without him. And there were darker ones, messages threatening to ruin his life if he left her. One message read, "I will make you miserable if you try to be with anyone else. You'll see." Another said, "I'd rather see you dead than with another woman." Those weren't the texts of a woman in fear. They were the writings of someone determined to control, possess, own. Ryan, on the other hand, had also left behind messages, conversations with friends and family where he opened up about feeling trapped. In one text to a friend just days before his death, he wrote, "This girl is going to kill me." Another friend later testified that Ryan was afraid of Shayna, that she would break into his house, call his phone repeatedly, even threaten to harm herself to get his attention. At one point, she had reportedly faked chest pains and called an ambulance, only to use it as a way to get Ryan to show up and talk to her. Police also found evidence that Shayna had accessed Ryan's Facebook account without his permission, deleted female contacts, and monitored his private messages. She was obsessed with who he talked to, especially women, and when Ryan began showing interest in Audrey Bolte, the beauty queen who was supposed to go on a date with him the night he was killed, it appeared to push Shayna over the edge. The final blow to her self-defense claim came from the autopsy and ballistics report. The trajectory of the bullets and the positioning of Ryan's body told a story far different from the one Shayna offered. Ryan was seated at the table when the first shot was fired, likely caught off guard. The shot to his forehead was close range. He may have already been on the ground when the second shot hit his face. The shots weren't fired in panic. They were spaced, deliberate. Not a chaotic act of fear, but a cold, methodical execution. The prosecution would later argue that Shayna, in a moment of jealousy and rage, shot Ryan not because she feared for her life, but because she realized she had lost control over his. She saw him pulling away, moving on, choosing someone else. And for Shayna, whose identity was so deeply entangled with being wanted, adored, and needed, that rejection was more than painful. It was intolerable. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the media picked up on the case, dubbing Shayna everything from the obsessed girlfriend to the cold-blooded killer with a smile. And while her defense team tried to paint her as a mentally unwell young woman pushed to the brink, the evidence against her kept growing. During the pretrial hearings, prosecutors revealed more footage, clips of Shayna asking police officers, while in custody, how soon she might be released on bail. At one point, she asked if she would be able to see Ryan's funeral on TV. Then came another chilling moment. When speaking to one of the officers, she casually said, "I guess I'll never get to marry him now." That wasn't grief. That wasn't trauma. That was something else. The prosecution began to build their timeline. On the day of the murder, Ryan had made it clear he was planning to go out that evening. Without Shayna, he had spent the afternoon texting Audrey Bolt, confirming their plans. Shayna found out. Angry, she began texting Ryan repeatedly. Some witnesses claim she showed up at his apartment around 6 p.m. There may have been a brief argument, but Ryan let her in. Whether it was out of guilt, fear, or simply exhaustion, he sat down with her one last time. And sometime during that conversation, something snapped. Shayna would later claim that Ryan was yelling, saying cruel things, threatening her. But there's no evidence that supports any of that. No neighbors heard shouting. There were no injuries on Shayna, just a calm, quiet woman who picked up a gun, walked up to the man who had tried again and again to leave her, and shot him in the face. 6 times. The upcoming trial would hinge on one central question. Was this truly self-defense? or the calculated murder of a man who had finally said enough. As Shayna sat in jail, her lawyers prepared to argue that she was not the villain the media portrayed her to be. They claimed she had a history of trauma, that she was unstable, that she was pushed into a corner. But with every new piece of evidence, the story of who she truly was came into sharper focus. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a crime of obsession. And Ryan Poston's final days, filled with anxiety, fear, and attempts to escape, would soon be laid bare before a jury. A trial was coming, and with it, the truth. But was it too late for justice? By the time the trial for the murder of Ryan Poston began in April of 2015, the courtroom in Campbell County, Kentucky, was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of both families. People who wanted answers, justice, or simply to witness a tragic love story that had spiraled into horror. What unfolded over the next few weeks was not just a criminal proceeding, it was a public dissection of obsession, manipulation, and the terrifying power of emotional control. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their central argument. Shayna Hubers was not a victim of domestic abuse. She was the abuser. She was not frightened for her life. She was furious that Ryan Poston was choosing a life that did not include her. According to them, this was a premeditated act, a final, violent attempt to stop a man from walking out the door one last time. The state presented hundreds of text messages showing Shayna's jealous rages, her desperate attempts to manipulate Ryan into staying with her, and her chilling threats that often bordered on the delusional. Messages like, "If I can't have you, no one can," and "I'm the only one who will ever love you this much," painted the picture of a woman who was not just in love, but in control, or at least trying to be. Then came the forensic evidence. The coroner testified that the gunshots were not fired all at once, but rather spaced out. There was time between them, time that Shayna used to aim again, pull the trigger again, even after Ryan had already fallen to the ground. The most telling detail was the final 2 bullets to Ryan's face. The medical examiner stated these were likely delivered after Ryan had already collapsed, possibly even already dead or unconscious. This wasn't a panic response. It was a deliberate, violent act, a final erasure of the man who had rejected her. The prosecution also played the now infamous police interrogation footage for the jury. It was haunting. There was Shayna, just hours after the shooting, twirling in the interview room, smiling to herself, joking about how she gave him the nose job he always wanted. She laughed. She fixed her hair. She spoke about how she knew Ryan was dying because he was making gurgling noises. Her tone, flat, almost detached, was chilling. It didn't feel like trauma. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like performance, like someone rehearsing for a role no one asked her to play. But perhaps the most devastating moments in court came not from the experts or detectives, but from Ryan Poston's family. His sisters, mother, and father sat in the courtroom every day, reliving his last hours through pictures, texts, and the cold, factual language of investigators. They wept quietly as they listened to how their beloved son and brother had been killed in his own home by a woman he had tried so many times to push away. A man who, despite all his warnings to friends, still allowed Shayna into his life that one final evening, perhaps hoping she'd change, perhaps simply too tired to fight her anymore. Then it was the defense's turn. Shayna's attorneys painted a radically different portrait. They claimed she had been emotionally abused by Ryan, that he was cold, manipulative, and cruel in private, that he used her, then tossed her aside, that she had mental health issues, including borderline personality traits, and was pushed to a breaking point after months of psychological torment. They tried to frame the killing not as premeditated, but as a result of trauma and panic. The defense even brought in a psychologist to speak about Shayna's emotional instability, her need for validation, and the way she clung to relationships to avoid feelings of abandonment. Shayna herself took the stand. In a soft, trembling voice, she told the jury about the pain she felt in the relationship. She said Ryan had belittled her, insulted her, made her feel small. She claimed he was emotionally abusive, that he told her she was worthless, and on the night of the shooting, he had told her to pack her bags and get out of his life. She said she felt threatened, that he lunged at her, and that she grabbed the gun in fear. But as she spoke, it became clear that her words didn't match the evidence. The prosecutors cross-examined her ruthlessly. They reminded her and the jury of the absence of any signs of physical struggle. They questioned why, if she was so terrified, she didn't leave the condo that night instead of staying for hours. They pointed to her behavior after the shooting, the lack of remorse, the jokes, the dancing, the coldness. And in those moments, Shayna's composure began to crack. Jurors watched her closely. Some would later say they felt no sincerity in her tone, no authenticity in her grief. They saw a woman not overcome by guilt, but desperate to justify the unjustifiable. The contradictions in her story, her ever-changing narrative, and her performative behavior all combined to damage her credibility beyond repair. On April 23, 2015, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of murder. Shayna Hubers showed little emotion as the words were read aloud. But behind her, Ryan's family broke down. It was a moment of bittersweet justice. No sentence could bring Ryan back. No amount of punishment would undo the loss they had suffered. But at least now, there was accountability. Recognition that what had happened wasn't a tragic accident or a moment of fear. It was murder. Shayna was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But even after her conviction, the story wasn't over. In August 2016, a shocking revelation emerged. One of the jurors in her trial had failed to disclose a prior felony conviction, something that legally disqualified him from jury service. Shayna's legal team filed for a retrial, arguing that the presence of a disqualified juror had tainted the fairness of her trial. And in a surprising twist, the court agreed. Her conviction was vacated. A new trial was scheduled. The public reaction was stunned. Could she really walk free? Would a second jury see things differently? The answer would come soon enough. In many criminal cases, a verdict is the final word, a sense of closure. But in the story of Shayna Hubers, in the brutal murder of Ryan Poston, the conviction in 2015 was just another turn in a long and painful journey. With the revelation that a convicted felon had served on the jury, something strictly prohibited by Kentucky law, Shayna's legal team seized their opportunity. The court agreed. Her right to a fair trial had been compromised. Her 40-year murder conviction was vacated, and a new trial was ordered. For Ryan's family, it was a gut punch. After everything they had endured, the tears, the testimony, the years of grief, now they had to relive it all again. The second trial began in August of 2018, but this time, things were different. The prosecution had refined its case. They were even more prepared, even more relentless in exposing the cold, calculated actions of Shayna Hubers. They leaned heavily on her own words. Her interrogation video became a centerpiece once again. Her eerie laughter, her disturbing comments about Ryan's nose job, her complete lack of sorrow. It was all shown again, but now with an even clearer context. This wasn't a woman traumatized by violence. This was someone in control, someone who believed her actions were justified, even necessary. Prosecutors presented a timeline that left little room for doubt. They described how Ryan had made plans to meet Miss Ohio, a woman he was supposed to have dinner with the night he was killed. He was pulling away from Shayna, and she knew it. They told the jury that this was the final trigger. Shayna couldn't stand to be discarded, to be replaced. So she waited until she was alone with him in his condo, and she struck. Again, the jury heard the forensics, how Ryan had been shot 6 times, how the last bullets were delivered as he lay motionless. They heard from the medical examiner about the unnatural spacing between the shots, how there was time to pause, to walk around the body, to shoot again. There was no struggle, no bruising, no signs of self-defense, just execution. The defense once again tried to portray Shayna as mentally unstable, as someone who had suffered emotional abuse at Ryan's hands. They brought in psychologists to speak of narcissistic personality disorder, of borderline traits, of abandonment trauma. Shayna's attorneys argued that she had been driven into a dissociative state by Ryan's rejection, that she had acted out of panic and fear. But the jury didn't see panic. They saw premeditation. They saw obsession. They saw someone who had made herself the center of Ryan's life. And when he tried to break free, she pulled the trigger. 6 times. In the courtroom, Ryan's family once again sat through the painful process. They watched Shayna speak about their son, the man she had killed, as though he had brought it upon himself. They listened quietly, their faces marked with grief and disbelief. What must it have felt like to hear your son's murderer describe him not as a victim, but as an aggressor? To sit silently as she twisted his final hours into something sinister and false? On August 28, 2018, after a short deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty of murder, again. Shayna Hubers was reconvicted of killing Ryan Poston. This time the sentence was life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. For Ryan's family, there was no celebration, just quiet, exhausted relief. Justice had been restored, again. But even behind bars, Shayna's name would not fade from public attention. Reports soon emerged of her marrying another inmate, an interesting detail that added to the public's perception of her as someone forever seeking validation, attention, connection. Even in prison, she remained a character who intrigued and disturbed in equal measure. In interviews and letters, Shayna maintained her story. She spoke of abuse, of betrayal, of fear. She insisted that she was not a monster, that she had only wanted love and safety. But to the outside world, and especially to Ryan Poston's loved ones, her words rang hollow, because nothing could change what she had done. Today, Shayna Hubers remains incarcerated in a Kentucky correctional facility. Her chance at parole won't come until 2032, but for many, especially those who knew and loved Ryan, it won't matter how many years pass, because the impact of that one night in October 2012 will never fade. And maybe that's what makes this case so unforgettable. Not just the murder, but the psychological unraveling that surrounded it. The way love, when poisoned by obsession, can turn fatal. The way a seemingly intelligent, ambitious woman could spiral into something unrecognizable. And the way justice, even when delayed, can still arrive, cold and certain. This was the case of Shayna Hubers, a twisted love story written in bullets. A chilling reminder that some people don't fall